Hey everyone, today I'm coming at you with another tier list, and this is the big one that I've kind of been talking about for a little bit. This is going to be the all characters tier list, all 33 characters in the entire game I will be ranking for you. Now, 33 characters is a lot, and I don't want this being a super long video. That's just kind of annoying and tedious. No one wants to sit through an hour-long video. So I'll do my best to be as concise as possible in all of my explanations, and hopefully they'll make sense. Now, a couple things I obviously have to set the grounds for, so we're on the same page as we're going through this together. What am I tiering them on? What is the scale? Ultimately, if I were to summarize it, how impactful do I think they are on your gameplay, on your run? Do I think this character is so powerful because they do this one thing super, super amazingly, or they do a bunch of things really, really well, to the point where they're almost carrying your team or you're building the team around them? Or do I think they're just sort of average where, the roles they offer is nothing really super special? There's other characters that could perform that role just as well, so it's fairly average. Or do I think this character and the role they bring to the team is just so weak there's pretty much no reason to use them? You'll notice I do have D tier included this time for all 33 characters. I think it's fair enough to use it, as there will be a large enough spread to warrant the D tier. And the last thing to establish is, what do the tiers mean? Well, S tier is going to be the heroes that I think just perform their role so extremely well that they can almost carry you better than any other character in that role. Or on the opposite side of that, they may not do any one thing just absolutely amazing, but they do all kinds of things so extremely well that they're just bringing so much to your team that they'll be filling multiple roles and doing them so well, you will just almost be finding ways to build combos off of them. A tier, this is going to be the characters that, are very strong, they're doing their job very well compared to all of the other options you have available to you. They definitely stand out in some way, but I don't think their performance is anything sort of groundbreaking to the point where I think they're basically almost OP in a way. B tier, whatever they do it well. Nothing amazing per se, but also nothing bad. There's not going to be anything wrong with them. You're not going to feel bad for using them, but there's definitely going to be some other standouts that you'll probably pick before them if given the chance. C tier is where the characters begin to show some weaknesses, some holes, whatever role they bring to the table, and maybe don't do it quite as well as the other options you may have. They aren't quite just flat out bad yet. There's still some use to them. It just may be a bit niche. They may have some good opportunities, but it's not going to be always available or as present or as effective in the, full spread of scenarios you may find yourself in. And they just kind of have a bit of a niche role. They may be team comp dependent or alignment dependent, that kind of stuff. D tier is when you get to the characters that are just not great. You could bring them if you wanted to. You can beat the game with any characters, really, but there's just a noticeable difference between these characters and the others where, sure, you can bring them, but any of these other ones can do the same job, but noticeably better. I think that's everything. I hope it makes sense, and let's get into it. Kicking off the list, we're going alphabetical order. We have Sir Balin with an A, the champion. You get him really early in the game, and he is a champion, so he's very solid just overall. All the champions do, very good damage. That's the role they bring, is damage dealing, and sort of a sub-role is armor breaking. I mean, all classes have some armor break, but they definitely do it the best. And when it comes to damage dealing as a champion, he's really good, but their main competition of that being the Vanguards, and even, I think, Arcanists to a degree. They may do a bit more damage than Arcanists, but they don't have any of the utility. And his damage, I don't think, really stands out amongst the other main damage dealers, amongst the Vanguards, amongst the champions. Nothing really helps him stand out. So this is probably our first good example of a B tier. He's very solid, but nothing he does in his role is super amazing. Nothing really stands out, Next up is his brother, Balin with an I. I have no idea if I'm supposed to be pronouncing these differently or not, but whatever. Vanguard Balin. He's a lot like his brother. He's very standard as far as the damage dealers go. Nothing really stands out. He has a very generic skill tree for his class even, and no utility. The Vanguard, much like the champion, doesn't even have the sort of sub-role of armor break. If you're not running a champion, it kind of defaults to them because they're going to be doing the most damage in your group, but even then, earlier on in the game, it's not going to be great. So because he only offers damage dealing, and there are other damage dealers that are better than him, I think, and stand out more, he's also B tier, keeping the brothers together. Next is Bedivere, another Vanguard, and he's an Old Faith alignment locked hero. He's a little bit worse than the other Vanguards. One thing he has going for him is he's the only Old Faith Vanguard. There's 2 neutrals, 2 Christians, and he's the one Old Faith. So if you really want that loyalty bonus, he does have that going for him. But his skills overall are a bit worse. I think Lightning Trap is worse than Jumping Attack, and Sprint is worse than Jump. They aren't terrible, but I do think they're worse. So generally, you're better off picking any of the other Vanguards, but because he isn't terrible, and if you really want that alignment bonus, he's the one you're going to go with, so he does, I think, fill in the niche spot, and therefore is C tier. Next up is the Black Knight, and I think the Black Knight is probably the best champion in the game. I'm not taking into account gear like teleport on kill and stuff, as that really does sort of close the gap between them, just looking at their skills, because gear is RNG dependent. Champions do amazing damage, especially as you get later into the game, they really take off. But the biggest detriment to their damage dealing is their lack of mobility. Well, the Black Knight has mobility, and it comes with an AoE, and that AoE synergizes so strongly with their other tier 3 skills like Killing Spree, and that's just, it can't be overstated how strong that is, I feel like. Being able to shore up their biggest weakness while also playing into their strengths simultaneously, it's just one move, but that one move makes such a huge difference, and I think allows him to pull off some sweeps and some combos that just no other champion can do, and allows him to just take off in a way as a damage dealer that honestly cannot really be matched by most other damage dealers in the game. So I do think he goes into S tier. Next up is our first marksman, Sir Bors, and unfortunately, without that gear in the end game, marksmen just are not great. They're good in Act 1, they're okay in Act 2, and nosedive hard after that. And unfortunately, Sir Bors has no utility with him. He has Mark Target, which is okay, but it only works for ranged attacks. No utility to speak of. He's basically a damage dealer. That's his role, and he's not good at it. There is something to be said about being ranged. It offers some safety, but so many team comps have so many tools to boost up survivability where range doesn't become as big of an advantage as it may originally be at the beginning of the game. So because of that, he goes into D tier. Next up is Boudicea, or Boudicea, however you pronounce it. I don't know. I've tried researching it, I get different answers. Boudicea, she's a Vanguard and she's neutral, which can be a bit of a downside. You're going to have to feed some events to her, but you can get her to Faithful. And she's the best Vanguard in the game. She has the best damage because she has 2 damage upgrades on her strike attack. So in terms of damage dealer, she just skill tree wise is the strongest in damage dealing off of that, but she also brings support. She's the only character, I think, where their main role is damage dealing that also has support baked into their skill tree, and that's huge. Encouragement is a great skill. It's not absolutely amazing like Inspire, for example, but it's still really, really good. It can really help set up the party to wipe out the rest of the enemies after she's done going on her killing spree herself. So due to being one of the highest damage dealers amongst the damage dealers, as well as having support on top of that, I think she's a very solid S tier. She does her job very well and brings in something extra on top of it. Next is Sir Brunor. He's a lot like Balin. The only difference is they have 2 skills swapped in their skill tree, where he has defensive stance in tier 1 instead of power attack. He's very bland, but he is Tyrant. The main thing is he has to compete against the Black Knight, and I see no reason to use Brunor over the Black Knight unless you just really, really want that defensive stance. So, again, he's not bad, but he's just very standard. So, B tier. Next up is Dagonet, and Dagonet is actually so good. Out of all the Arcanists, he is the king of the debuffs. He has so many cheap spells with Desecrated Ground, Stigma. He can cycle with Mindstorm a lot easier. He can actually get off a couple Death Hexes in a single turn much more consistently than other ones, and Death Hex is an absolutely just crazy good skill. And he has an AoE slow in the form of Desecrated Ground. It also does damage. His damage isn't great, but his debuffing is so insane and sort of compensated through Death Hex, which isn't like normal damage because it comes back at the end of their turn, but it's a great setup tool and can just combo so strongly and help secure kills. It's basically damage, and because of this just ability to cycle so much, do so many debuffs, and double Death Hex, I do think he goes in S tier. Personally, I know some people absolutely think he's kind of nuts, and so I'm not of the exact same mind, but I do think putting him in S is fair, but if someone maybe wanted to put A, I could understand where they're coming from on that too. For me, I think he can go in S. Next up is Sir Damas, and he's the Tyrant Christian alignment hero, and he's a marksman, and I think he's probably the highest damage dealing marksman, but even the best damage dealing marksman is not as good a damage dealer as pretty much anyone else. He offers no utility. He has Gas Trap, which is terrible. His, not Smothering Shot, but Crippling Shot has like a single target slow, I guess, on it. It's not great. His utility is not enough to bring him out of D tier, and his damage is still too low to warrant it as well. Dindraine, she's a very standard marksman. I think she's probably the strongest early game marksman due to having Burning Arrow and Poison Arrow, and I think she has some potential after the buff comes in, but as it currently stands, she's just also D tier. Up next is Ector, and he's an Arcanist, so he's very good by the nature of being an Arcanist, but you're not using him a lot of the time. A lot of players, he's just the dust generator, they stick him in the tower and never touch him again. And that's because if you're going Old Faith, which is half of the alignment options, he's the weakest option. There's better picks for Arcanist with literally any of the other ones. Again, he's not bad, he's just power crept, really. So if you're going Christian, in my experience, how I play, a lot of people I've talked to that play Rightful Christian, they don't use Ector either. They stack up on Sages instead, and so they don't use him in that alignment either. So there's only one out of the 4 alignments that he seems to consistently get use in, and that's Tyrant Christian. And he's really good in Tyrant Christian because he's your only Arcanist, and I think that's kind of the definition of C tier. He's not bad by any means, but he's extremely alignment dependent. Now we get to the Faerie Knight, who's a very special one, and very different from the rest of the mold of his Arcanist brethren, and he's a little bit of a weird one to place role-wise. He's sort of a tank, a variant tank, not the same traditional types of bulkiness, and he's also kind of a damage dealer. He is very good at picking off the back line. He's sort of an assassin, and he does both of these surprisingly well, actually. He can tank much better than you may think initially, and he can get a lot of damage picks very well on top of that. So I don't think he's anything crazy that puts him into S tier, but I think he definitely stands out above average in terms of the roles he fills. Because of that flexibility he has, I think that's also a very good strength of his. And a lot of people sort of make teams to accommodate for that and get some really good results. Next is Galahad, and he's probably the best defender in the game. He has all the strong defensive utility you want with Taunt and Guard and Shield Charge. On top of that, he has some debuff or crowd control with a melee stun, and he has buffing support with Divine Favor, which I think is one of the strongest support abilities in the game. Personally, I think it's better than Inspire. That's, a bit subjective. Some people fight me on that. But for me, I think it's probably the best buff support ability in the game. So not only is he tanking, he's also supporting through buffs and a CC. It's just phenomenal. He's an S tier. He's going in pretty much every single Christian team, without a doubt. Up next, we have Gwain, and he kind of straddles the fence a bit for me. As a defender, he's neutral, which neutral is generally worse than having an alignment. Having an alignment may lock you out of certain playthroughs, but in a lot of cases, neutral locks you out of all of them. You get him super late in the game, so you're going to have to feed him events to get his loyalty up, and there's just better characters to feed events to. His negative trait is so bad, it's worth consideration when tiering him. Active skills cost 3 skill points to learn, so that's a huge pain. And his skill tree just is nothing super crazy. I mean, he has that defensive utility that you're going to want from your defenders, but there's really no reason to take him over the other ones because he's just such a pain to use. I think he belongs in D tier. There's no reason to use him. There just isn't. Not even really niche-wise. If you're going Christian, you're definitely not using him. And for Old Faith, there's 2 others that I think probably fit better than him, and we'll get to them later. Now we have Sir Geraint. He's the Old Faith rightful alignment locked hero, and he's actually the only Old Faith marksman, so if you really do want to run a marksman and you're doing Old Faith, he's the one for you if you want to get those loyalty bonuses. Marksmen obviously aren't super strong, but he does offer utility, and that's the one thing no other marksman offers in any meaningful way. His shock arrow is really good. It can shock up to 4 targets that are spread very far apart, and shock is one of the strongest debuffs in the game, I think. He has enough utility to compensate for his marksman damage that I think it just barely brings him up to C tier. It's like bottom of C tier, but I do think he does worm his way up into there, because I could see you using him at least, whereas all these other ones I just cannot see you using. Reaching our first sage of the tier list, I believe, we have Lady Guinevere, and she's a strong one. She offers that good support, the buffs that you come to expect from sages, but she does have something that helps her stand out a bit. She's not just playing the role of support through buffing, she's also playing the role of a bit of a damage dealer, sort of a secondary damage dealer, but still damage. She has teleport, which is an absolutely amazing tool, like with Faerie Knight, to get to that back line of enemies and start picking off those enemy archers or spellcasters. And due to the fact that she is, a duo role unit, many people use her as their primary sage, and I can see why. I don't think she's super busted or anything. She's not going to be carrying your team. You're not going to be building your team around her. I don't think she's like on the same level as these S tier characters, but she's a very, very solid A tier for sure. Next is Lady Isolde, and much like Guinevere, she is a dual role sage. She is entirely support, but she offers buffing and debuffing support. So she's both boosting the party and weakening the enemy. She has Ice Lance and Ice Aura. Now, Ice Lance is very strong. It's a ranged freeze, very strong debuff, as well as just having the buffing support. She's very impactful on your play. I think a lot of people that, go Old Faith use Isolde a lot, and I think there's a good reason for that. I think she brings good support of both kinds, so I think she goes into A tier. Now we have Sir Kay, the first character you get in the game. He's a champion. He's honestly just kind of niche, I think. His negative trait is another one of those traits that I think is annoying enough that it's worth mentioning, especially if you're playing on the higher difficulties. His skills overall are a bit worse than the other champions. I mean, I think Death Strike is just marginally worse than Power Attack. Kick is good, and that's just extra. But then he has Preparedness, which is terrible. So I don't really see many cases in taking him over the other champions, especially because he's neutral. That being said, you can still bring him if you do really like the fact that he has Kick. I think Kick is sort of his saving grace and puts him as sort of a niche pick rather than a bad pick. Now we have Lancelot, the rightful alignment champion, and he's really, really good. He is the role of damage dealer and support. He's not a primary damage dealer, he's a secondary. He's missing rage, so his damage isn't going to be as good as the other champions, but he does compensate by bringing in powerful utility. He has Inspired above the party, he has Radiance to debuff the enemies with blinds and chill and vulnerability, all three into one, I believe, and he has Ice Spikes, which gives him extra AoE, which can also apply chill. So he just brings so many different things to the group. I don't think he's going to be carrying by any means, because I don't think he has the damage for it. If he had Rage, 100%, I think he'd be the best champion in the game. He also has mobility with Assault, so I think his damage is the only thing where it just doesn't put him into S, but he does a lot of things very well that you will definitely notice his impact on your group. Moving on to Lanval, he's a neutral champion. The only reason you really pick him is early on, he has access to defensive stance, if you would really rather have that over Balin's power attack. Once you get later into the game, though, you're definitely going to be replacing him with someone else. The only sort of really use I've seen some people mention having him for is to sort of cheese the training grounds, and even that I think is a big boon. So I'm going to put him in C because he still does good damage as a champion class. That's sort of what saves him, but there's really no reason to pick him in most cases over your other champions. The next rightful hero is Sir Leodegrance. He is a sage, and he's sort of the vanilla sage. Nothing super special about him, but he's still very good. He offers good buff support, and he has a little bit of battlefield control with Ice Wall, but mostly he's just support. He buffs, and, he does it well because he's a sage. Following him up is going to be Sir Lucan. He is the rightful Christian alignment hero, and he's also a sage. And he's a bit different. He has much less sort of support than the other sages because he doesn't have Ice Wall. Most of the sages have Ice Wall, he does not have that. So he's missing some battlefield control, but he's a bit more aggressive. So he's more of a damage dealer compared to them than, supporting the party. I don't think he's better than Sir Leo, honestly. I like the way his skill tree is built more, but I don't think he's any stronger. I think he may actually be a little weaker because Ice Wall is such a strong utility it brings for the party, and he doesn't really have that. He's more of a damage dealer with support, and, as a secondary damage dealer, he's alright. I think he's not quite as good as Gwain in that regard, and yeah, so that I think drops him down to B. Now we have Merlin, and I think everyone knows where he's going to go. Merlin is just absolutely nuts. He has all kinds of crazy skills. He has Illusion, Teleport, Mind Fog. He's one of the higher damage dealing Arcanists, not taking into account Death Hex, which is kind of cheating. But just in terms of his damage skills, he's definitely probably the highest damage dealing. And he's really, really good at it. Plus, he can just pick up those souls with his illusions. He has utility coming out the ass. He's definitely S tier. Now we have the main character of the game, Sir Mordred. He doesn't have a whole lot of defensive utility. He's missing guard and he's missing taunt, which are very strong skills. Instead, he goes for the debuffing route. He has Chain Lightning, he has Thunderbolt, he has Stigma. He stuns the targets, he shocks them to try and prevent them from reaching you, or limiting their actions, or he debuffs them so you can kill them easier. This is very strong, but generally you want your defenders to be offering that defensive support. I think he does debuff well, so he's more of a debuff unit, and you have to play more smartly with him to meet wall correctly. So because of that, I do think he goes into B tier, but I think he's a very high B tier. Moving on to Morgana, another Arcanist. She's probably my favorite Arcanist in the game. She has just great ice skills. She has a number of ways to apply freeze or chill, very strong debuffs. She has very high single target damage. She probably has the highest single target damage out of all the Arcanists due to the Death Hex and Glacial Strike combo. Just phenomenal. Her spells do tend to be amongst the most expensive, so she can't Mind Storm cycle quite as well. So when it comes to debuffing and damage dealing, she can't do it quite as well as, the S tier Arcanist, but because her damage is so high, I do think she fits into A tier. Next up is another kick-ass lady spellcaster, and that's Morgawse. She's the mutually exclusive hero that you have to choose between either Merlin or her. And a lot of people pick Merlin, understandably so, and I think she really gets overshadowed and underestimated in how strong she is. She is probably hands down the best debuffer in the game, I think, because she can offer chill, freeze, stun, and shock. 4 different types of debuffs, all in one unit, with ice plates to offer great survivability. She can do so many different things to shut down the enemy party that honestly, when you have her in your group, you'll be finding that you'll be just comboing off of her with your other debuffers all of the time and just setting up such huge shutdowns of the enemy team. I can't put her anywhere but S tier. Now we have Sir Pelleas, and he is the most vanilla defender, and I think in a vacuum, looking at just the defenders, probably the worst one, because he doesn't really offer anything that none of the other ones don't also offer. However, you get him early on, and he has Taunt and Guard. If you're going Old Faith, the only defender you get really is Mordred or Gwain later in Act 3. So if you really want a defender that can bring that defensive utility that defenders are known for, he can bring that, because Mordred can't. So he's sort of a niche pick if you want a taunt defender for the Old Faith alignment. And because of that, I think he goes into C tier. I think you're better off using Mordred, but some people really like having a defender that can use taunt and guard, and if that's the case, Pelleas is the one for you. We have yet another defender up next, and that's Sir Percivale. And honestly, he's just kind of a knockoff Galahad. He's extremely strong. He's just also Christian. So if you're doing a Christian run, you're going to get Galahad, so I don't see why you wouldn't pick Galahad. So that really reduces the impact he's going to be bringing, because he shares the exact same roles as Galahad. Defensive support and buff support. He has encouragement, which I think is just worse than Divine Favor, and then just all the same defensive abilities that Galahad brings. The difference is, I think Percivale maybe has a bit better damage with his immolation skill, but he has less crowd control because he doesn't have a stun in the form of Divine Smite. He's good at all of his roles, but he's just nothing super amazing, and his impact is definitely reduced by the fact that there's just a him but better that you will always have access to if you're going with that alignment. Up next, we have the Red Knight, and the Red Knight is sort of an interesting one. He can do a lot of different things, and that's a huge plus for him. It's always great when you have a character that's flexible and can sort of fill different playstyles, but unlike Faerie Knight, he doesn't do them quite as well. He can go defensive if you spec him that way, but it won't be as good as his other defenders. His defensive utility isn't as strong. He doesn't have guard, and he doesn't have taunt. He has mock, which is just a weaker taunt. If you want to build him offensively, you can do that, and he can be your highest damage dealing defender of the group, but defender damage still isn't great, so if you're trying to make him a sort of secondary damage dealer, he's not a great secondary damage dealer. If you want to do a hybrid, you get some of both and, master and none, kind of thing. He is still fairly useful due to his flexibility, and he is an option as an Old Faith Tyrant run. So Old Faith does get access to another defender, and it's still not one with huge defensive utility. So it's more than Mordred, less than Pelleas, but more damage than Pelleas and Mordred. I think this is a pretty good C tier. I really like him, but the roles he's filling, he's just not as great at it as a lot of the other options you have available to you. Next up is Tegyr. He's the exact same as Balin, only regular Christian instead of Tyrant Christian. They have the exact same skill tree. He's going to go in the exact same tier as Balin. Next, we have Sir Tristan, who's a dead unit when you first get him, so that's not great in terms of impact. And he does fill the role as a damage dealer because he's a vanguard, but he also has a bit of debuffing. The problem is his impact as a damage dealer is diminished because he doesn't have assassination, so he does less damage than the other vanguards, and he doesn't get AP refunds quite as strong as the other vanguards, which diminishes his damage dealing even more. He does offer some debuffing, but I don't think the poison debuffs are strong enough to really compensate for the lack of damage that he misses out on because of it. Because of that, I think he's probably going to be like a high B tier, because his damage isn't bad, but he's probably one of the weakest main damage dealers as far as that role goes, and his debuffing also isn't great when you're comparing him to other debuffers. Our last champion for the list is the White Knight. He's very powerful. He has some sort of cheesy combos you can do with stacking Blessed Weapon. So he has a very high damage ceiling, but he doesn't have mobility. And because he doesn't have mobility, that indirectly hurts his damage dealing potential. And because of that, while his raw numbers may be high, he doesn't get the ability to use it quite as efficiently as some of your other damage dealers. I think that puts him into A tier. Lastly is Yvain. He's a marksman, so he's going in D tier. He has 0 utility, and 2 of his unique skills are garbage. Assassination is a good skill, but essentially useless on him. Yeah, D tier. And that wraps up this tier list. That is every single character. I hope where I placed them made sense, and the reasoning for why I put them there made sense. I tried real hard, going into this video, trying to make sure I had a coherent scale, and I was able to explain it. If it just, none of it made sense to you, and it just seemed like I was arbitrarily placing characters somewhere, I apologize. But, I did my best, and that's all you're going to get from me. I hope this list was helpful or informative to some players out there. And as always, thanks for watching.